everybody, and welcome to a special bonus episode of your Bish Therapist podcast. I am your host, Melissa Reich, your Bish Therapist, a real-life therapist turned pop culture aficionado, serving clinical interpretations and hot takes on all things pop culture. And today's episode, I really wanted this to be for all of you, because I know in the last couple of weeks, and excuse my voice, allergy season is here in Northeast PA, and my allergies have been atrocious, so I'm doing the best that I can. But I'm a little froggy today. So for those of you who, have been following me on social media and on my podcast, you know that I had a really epic week. I was a guest on Rachel Goes Rogue podcast. And if you don't know that, you know that now. I was featured in Us Weekly, in the Daily Mail. I mean, my life, I just woke up one day and things were kind of different. So I realized that I've been having a lot of guests on my shows lately. I've had kind of 4 weeks of guests and things like that. And the reason I'm doing all this is because for me, this podcast is really an opportunity for growth and creativity and evolution. And so I'm always going to want to try new things. People, they got used to me kind of doing this by myself. And so having a guest is a new experience. And so I'm just going to try to experiment with different things. And I want to hear what you all think of it. So this bonus episode is really to share my experience with Rachel and the podcast. And I had some things that I wanted to say about it because I knew that I was going to get a lot of backlash and, so would she, but she's used to it. So I wanted to share a little bit about some of my thoughts on that. I also want to cover 2 things. I'm going to cover Summer House today, and I'm going to cover part 3 of the Real Housewives of Beverly Hills reunion. The con of having guests on is just that people don't get the deep dives or a lot of my significant opinions, which you all are used to getting. So I am aware that sometimes when I have guests on, I may do an extra bonus episode here or there, just so that, you can hear my thoughts on things. And here's the irony. So Summer House, I never even watched Summer House because, to be honest, I don't, I have issues with alcohol. Like I'm an ACOA, right? So I grew up with alcohol, and I saw just, the negative side of it and all of that. So for me, entertainment isn't necessarily watching people get blind drunk every weekend. That's not always, that's not usually what I gravitate towards. But with what's been going on with Lindsay and Carl lately, last year, I kind of heard some things about it. And so I started tuning in really kind of to observe their relationship and Kyle and Amanda and all of that. And so now I'm in on Summer House. I will be covering the entire season. I'm not sure how I'm going to do that yet, but I am going to do that. So I want to start out by talking about my experience on Rachel Goes Rogue with Rachel Leviss. And after that, I'll cover Summer House. And then lastly, I'm going to cover Real Housewives of Beverly Hills Part 3. I know people said it was kind of snoozy, but I have some different thoughts on it. So I can't wait to share that with you all. So first, let's start with just first of all, thank you to those of you who have supported me and been really kind and wonderful. I mean, I'm fortunate in that this community of folks that I have around me, you're really wonderful people. You're so important to me. And when Rachel Goes Rogue posted, and I posted about it, I was really fortunate that this community of folks really lifted me up. And, I did get some nasty comments here and there, but it was really few and far between on my page. Now, other pages I've realized I can't, to protect myself in this space, to protect my mental health. I understand that people on the internet, ignorance is the loudest. Ignorant voices are often the loudest, but it doesn't mean that they're the majority. They're just the loudest. They're good at screaming and tantruming and all of these things. And so I just want to thank this community. It's really special to me. It's really important to me. I appreciate you all. I appreciate the support. And, I've just realized, as I go along in this journey, I just can't make everybody happy. In fact, there are things that people watch this or listen to this just to be angry about things or, whatever it is. I'm not focusing my energy on that anymore. I'm focusing it on you guys and the people who deserve to have my energy. And I also, I had a conversation with my therapist that this is all really still new for me. And so my mental health and my physical health, they're my priorities. And if this starts to compromise that, I can't continue to do this. And I don't want to not do this anymore. I really love what I'm doing. And so I'm just taking some factors to protect myself. I'm no longer reading my podcast ratings because people, unfortunately, have taken the opportunity to go there and just be awful. And I'm not going to give it any more light or energy than that because that's what they want. Comments sometimes on other people's pages, people are really, harsh and hard on me. And so I'm going to kind of put some blinders on. I'm going to focus on my community. I'm going to focus on my social media. I'm going to focus on the people who deserve my attention, which is you all. And I'm just going to keep, hustling and keep working and keep at this. So don't worry, I'm not going anywhere. I am just getting started and I couldn't be happier about it. So regarding Rachel, here's how this all happened. And I'm going to be honest that she DM'd me and I thought I was being catfished. So for those of you who know, there's been lots of wild, exciting things that have happened to me. Kyle reposting my stuff that, was a while back. Then I was quoted in the New York Times and then Rachel reaching out to me. She heard me on a podcast called Jamie All Over. It was a very, very special podcast for Jamie. Trigger warning, she talked about her experience with sexual assault and domestic violence. And she, bravely told her story. And I kind of sat with her and just provided some psychoeducation as she did that. And so when Rachel reached out to me, again, I thought I was being catfished, but then, we had a dialogue about it and I realized I wasn't being catfished, but, I love also that that's always my first instinct is oh, someone's catfishing me. I love that about me. Progress, not perfection, right? So I'm a work in progress too. But, so we went back and forth about it and she just really said that she enjoyed the way that I talked about things. I supported Jamie telling her story and I also, gave some psychoeducation and things like that. So she really did appreciate that. And which I was like, that's great. Because I think for me, my goal here is just really to share my experience, strength, and hope, and also help people share theirs. Ultimately with the goal of helping people, right? So I was honored that Rachel felt like I was a good person to tell her story, to come on her podcast. And, at first I really assumed that it wouldn't happen because it was just such a meta moment. It's so for those of you who follow my podcast, your bitch therapist wasn't even born until after Scandival. So it's been about 1 year. I started my social media. Oh, my voice. I'm so sorry. I started my social media in July of 2023. And the podcast I didn't start until August or September. I'm forgetting exactly which. But anyway, the point is that I missed Scandival the first time around. But like you all, I watched, I did some memes about it on my social media page when I first started that. And I just, it was such a meta experience. If you told me during the height of Scandival that Rachel would be contacting me to go on her podcast talking about mental health, I would have said that you were on acid or you were doing some psychedelic assisted trauma therapy. And that's a callback to another episode I did, by the way. I would just not have believed you. I just would never have even seen it as something that I would even be doing or have access to doing. So it was a very wild meta experience. And the other wild meta experience was the fact that, my fellow content creators and my friend Lindsay, who was just a guest on my podcast, and people really loved her and they loved us together and all of that. If you would have told me that my friends would have been like covering me, again, I would have been like, you are unwell, friend. You should really look at that, because that is wild. But yet here we are. So let me just share a couple of observations. And I will say that I don't know if people are going to like this or not, but I asked Rachel for permission to talk about this because I feel that she has been talked about so much in such awful, awful ways. I didn't want to be a person who just talked about her or used her. You know what? I just didn't want to be that person. And so I was honest with her about, what I would kind of talk about. And if she wasn't comfortable with it, I said, that's okay. I don't have to discuss this. And I truly would have stood by that. But she said, no, of course, it's your podcast. Please, discuss. And again, I feel that my first impression of her was she is very sweet. She does have this energy about her that she's warm, she's sweet, she seems caring, like genuinely caring. We had DM'd a couple of times, and I'm not going to talk about what we said in those DMs because that is private. By the way, anyone who DMs me, those are private conversations. That's not ever anything that I share, even if it is with a notable person. That's just my morals, values, and ethics. But, she was just really supportive of me. And I felt, that's really interesting and special. Like, because sometimes when you do a guest spot, it's, not always about you, it's about them, and that's fine. But she really did seem to have a caring, kind of compassionate approach towards me. She said, listen, I know that this is going to be, like, I'm paraphrasing here, but, she appreciated that I took a leap of faith to go on her podcast because, she knew that I would get some backlash too, which of course I did. But here's the thing. I don't care about the backlash that I got, because at the end of the day, all we have is who we are. And so when I put my head on my pillow at the end of the day and I say, was I the best human that I could be today? Was I the best Melissa? Was I the best helper? Was I the best wife? Was I the best to myself? Right? Those are the only things that I truly care about. And so for me, I am very proud of what I did. I'm proud of what I did with Rachel. I'm proud of how I supported her. I'm proud of how, she spoke her truth, whether or not I agree with it. It's her truth. So it's not for me to agree with. So this is what people were angry that I didn't, quote unquote, hold her accountable. So the first thing I want to address is that, because the fact of the matter is there's a couple things. I am not her therapist. Even though the Daily Mail, they got it wrong initially. They said I was her therapist, and then they corrected it that I was just a therapist. So I'm glad that they did that, because I want to be clear. I am not Rachel's therapist. She has a therapist. She seems to have a really good situation there. She has good people around her. She has a good team. And so, right, that wasn't my role. My role was to sit with her while she spoke her truth. And I was there to provide psychoeducational information on grooming, because the one thing I really, and if I'm being candid, I haven't watched a lot of Vanderpump Rules because I just cannot deal with this redemption arc that they're trying to hand Sandoval. And you can't give someone a redemption arc who doesn't feel like they've done anything wrong and doesn't want to take accountability. So I could speak on that for a million years, but it's very annoying to me that people still are giving Rachel so much visceral hate and anger and, death threats. And I mean, I just can't emphasize enough that if you are threatening somebody to harm them that you don't even know because of something you saw them do on TV, you got to look at that. That is wild behavior. That is not acceptable. That is not okay. You have to look at, what is this about for me that I am getting so angry that I am threatening somebody else? Who do we think we are? That's insane. You can't do that. Okay. So it's wild to me how there is just this underlying misogyny here of like, so Rachel's still going to get trolled. Okay. But let's look at what Rachel actually did. Okay. So Rachel took accountability. And by the way, for people who are angry and saying that she doesn't take accountability, and I just couldn't disagree more. And so here's what I'm going to say on this. If you've never met Rachel or talked to Rachel, if you've never listened to her show, then you have no right to have an opinion about her level of accountability, because her show, I did listen to a bunch of the episodes in preparation for going on the show. And I had listened to one once before as well. But she, in every episode, has taken accountability. Not only has she verbally taken accountability, like she says, it doesn't matter the level of friendship that her and Ariana had. It doesn't matter the level. It was wrong, period. Right? Whether they were best friends, close friends, not friends, whatever. And if, they were friends, obviously, but she takes the accountability. So she's verbally taken accountability, right? She's admitted her wrongs. She's left the show. She went to treatment, which is very real, right? Months of treatment, that's very real. Inpatient, that's very intense treatment. She has no contact with Tom, and she's doing the internal work. And so here's what I want to ask people who really are struggling with her. What more do you want from her? I just think, like, as a human, and here's the thing, I'm not Rachel's best friend. I'm not here to be her bulldog or whatever. But I just, as a human and as a woman, I'm just like, what are we doing here? That we are still tearing this woman down who's doing all the right things. And yet Tom Sandoval gets more support when he is constantly, week after week, on the show saying, just trying to, as Ariana said, worm his way back into this group, trying to do half measures, right? So like, Rachel's really doing the work, in my opinion. And that's just my opinion as someone who when you do clinical work with people, you can just tell when people are doing the work or not. And I can tell that she's doing the work, and I can tell that Tom is not. He still has a terrible attitude. He does not acknowledge or admit his wrongdoings, and he really struggles to take accountability. And so I just want to point out that women can be tools for the patriarchy. And I'm sure people are rolling their eyes as they're hearing this, but like, let's not be tearing other women down who are telling their story, who have experienced something. Again, trigger warning. So what Rachel and I talked about was grooming, and people looked at that as I was handing her a convenient excuse, or she was taking a convenient excuse, and it's not. And so all I can say to that is it's easy to judge if you've never been in the situation. And quite frankly, people who have been in the situation, they still judge. I mean, I've had that too, where women who are survivors of things, they judge, and it's, that's a whole other thing. And I've talked about that on other podcasts. But my point here is that Rachel seems to be doing truly the work to get herself into a better space. And candidly, I wasn't able to I have a hard time listening back when I'm a guest on people's podcasts. Like I just, I have to listen to myself here because, for editing and things like that. But I just have a hard time doing it when I'm guesting on other people's shows. So I haven't listened to it. But there was a point, and I'm not sure if they edited this out, where I talked to her about, I had been with my husband for 22 years. And, before then I had just dated pretty much narcissist, right? That's what I knew from growing up with my dad. Just like complete antisocial, narcissistic, just not good people, until I started doing some work. And then I started learning to, not dive into those, familiar but unhealthy relationship constructs, right? And so I was talking to her about this, and she laughed and she joked and she said, well, I said to her, I'm sure when the time's right, it'll happen for you too. Once you do the work, you'll attract something different, or you'll feel attracted to something different. And she just kind of laughed and she said, well, I have a lot of work to do on me, and, I'm going to be staying single for a while. And I just thought, that's beautiful. That's like exactly the right thing to do. Like, whether you're in recovery from mental health or drug and alcohol issues or process addictions, whatever it is, the general rule is that, for at least a year, you want to be single so that you don't develop codependency on other people, or you're not acting out your issues with your partner, right? Like, we need time to heal. And Rachel is doing that work. And I don't know what else to say about it. I mean, people are just determined to be mad about it, to dislike her, to judge. And those are the people that you're never going to change their minds. But I will tell you, I got many messages from people who said, I'm listening because of you, meaning me, which, thank you. That was super lovely. So many people said, I don't listen to our podcast, but I will listen to hear you and all these things. Thank you. I appreciate that. When you listen to it, you can just tell that she is really, she's really trying to take ownership, but also understand, like, how did we get here? And how do I never get into this situation again? That's my personal opinion on it. Now, what I will say is that, going back to why I didn't hold her accountable, which I did not hold her accountable, just that I wasn't there to have some like weird gotcha moment like that. So the second reason is, like, that's just not who I am as a person. Like, I'm a nice person. I'm a kind person. And quite frankly, as a therapist, right? Like, I have sat in rooms with some people who have done some atrocious things, and I'm not going to be specific, but what I'm trained to do, and not even trained, because I don't think you learn this, I think it's just like a human component that I do love about me, is that when you look past the crappy behaviors to what led the person to do this, and then watching them take the accountability and work on shifting it's just like, that's what I'm good at. And it's not a bad thing. It's a wonderful thing. It makes me really good at what I do, but it also makes people really furiously angry, because people want me, or people wanted me, to eviscerate her. And I'm just never going to do that. That's not my role, and it's not my responsibility. Now, if she came on and was a guest on my podcast, I would ask her some questions. I would ask her some questions about some topics and some things. But I would ask them still in a human, loving, caring, respectful way. Like, that's just, it's almost like people don't like that I'm compassionate. And I feel like I don't know what to tell you about that. If you don't like that about me, then don't follow me. Then don't listen to me. I'm not right for you, because that is just always who I'm going to be. And as I said, at the end of the day, when I put my head on my pillow, that's all I got. So with all due, as Andy would say, if you don't like it, that's too bad. Don't listen, or don't whatever. It was my job to give psychoeducational information on grooming, which I did because I got lots of lovely messages about it. And I just want people hearing this to, maybe, if you didn't listen, give it a listen, right? See if it changes your mind. I did get a lot of people after, I went on, as I was saying, I'm sorry, I kind of trailed off to something else, which is people DM me and said, I listened because of you. And I actually completely changed my opinion on her. Complete 180. I got a lot of messages that said that. And so I think that here's what I want to say. I think that there's two types of people in this world. Okay. People who experience their own trauma and they don't look at it and they continue to wound other people because of their inability to look at their stuff. And then there are people who go through trauma and really terrible situations and become people who would just never want to hurt another human. Okay. I've kind of heard it being talked about like Batman versus the Joker. Okay. I'm always going to choose Batman. I'm always going to choose Batman. I'm never going to choose the Joker. And there are people out there, people who their voices are loud and they're ignorant and they're, they've had stuff happen to them and they think, well, they want to take the Joker route. They want to say, well, I've been hurt, so I'm going to hurt everybody around me. I've been hurt, so I'm going to yell into the void on the internet. I've been hurt, so I'm going to try to eviscerate everybody that I can. And that's just two different lanes. And so for the people who are looking for that other lane, that isn't me. And quite frankly, I don't respect that lane, period, because the person that is talking to you right now, I have crawled through mud and broken glass and saved my own life, literally, on more than one occasion. And that is who stands here before you. Okay. I am proud to be who I am. And I am never going to let people on social media change that. It's just never going to happen. My roots are too strong. So that's the end of that. The last thing I'm going to say about Rachel before I move on to these other topics is that I noticed. So the one observation I will share is that when I was talking to her, when people have experienced, whether you want to call it trauma or just, really challenging issues in their life, whatever you want to term it. For example, people who start using substances at like age 14 or, people who have had traumas, as teenagers and things like that. Sometimes people can get developmentally stuck. So developmentally stunted. So that's why, you'll see people, I would see people, they would come into treatment. They would literally act like teenagers, right? Because that's how old they were when they started using. And so people do get developmentally stuck and stunted. And then I would watch them as they got sober and as they learned and as they grew. And it was like a complete transformation into a completely different person. But what I will say is that I notice there is an kind of like a mismatch between Rachel's chronological age and her developmental age. And so as a therapist, what I can tell you is I've just gotten, I can't quantify it, but I've just gotten used to, sitting with people and kind of like assessing that. And when I was talking to Rachel, I did not feel that I was talking to someone who is 30 years old. I felt like I was talking to someone who had that stuckness, that kind of developmental teenage stuckness. In fact, it kind of took me by surprise because she had mentioned about being 28 when this all happened. And then it was like that meme where there's all those like physics, like the symbols and all of that. I was like, oh my gosh, wait, she's 30 years old. And it just like, it didn't even occur to me, or I forgot, I guess, that she was 30. Like it felt like I was talking to someone who was a little stuck. And that, you listen, she's going to be listening to this. Hey girl, happy to support you. So this is obviously something I would talk to her about if she wanted to talk to me about. And I'm sure she talks to her therapist about, but she is not of her chronological age, in my opinion. And that is very common when people have gone through a lot of things and they're in the process of healing, that there is a little bit of disconnect between those two things. And again, I'm not trying to I have no agenda here other than to just share my experience, share her experience, and, that's kind of it. So I guess, let's move on to other topics. But if you guys have any questions about that, any concerns, anything that you feel like I didn't, address or whatever, please DM me, let me know. I'm happy to talk more about this and have more of a conversation, but I support her. I think that it's, everyone deserves to be happy. She's not a monster. She did terrible things and she'll admit that, but she's not a monster. She's a human being. Everybody deserves the right to be happy. Even Tom Sandoval, which I hate saying that, but it is true, right? Like, you can't pick and choose. So, to be continued. We'll see if, I would love to have her on my podcast. I don't know if her team would allow that. But, I've got some great things in the works. So just stay tuned on that. I can't be more specific about that, but I will just say that I was reached out to potentially have a very exciting opportunity. I don't necessarily know if it will happen because it's kind of far away, but TBD. Okay. So now let's get on to Summer House. I did, for those of you who don't know, I did a podcast with Caitlin Marshall. She has a podcast called Besties by Caitlin. And she had me on to talk about Lindsay and Carl, but to also talk about attachment styles. So I talked a little bit about attachment theory by Bowlby and, some various attachment styles and things like that. So if you're interested in listening to that, please, you can find her podcast anywhere you listen to podcasts. And, I talked more about attachment theory in that. I'm not going to talk about that today so much because, I do always want to find a happy medium between sharing my thoughts and information, but also not making it feel like a lecture. So, okay. So I have so many thoughts about Carl and Lindsay, but we'll just go bit by bit from the start of the episode. So where we left off was, last week, Carl was talking to Lindsay about a sober bar, right? And, I think that there does need to be a shift in our societal zeitgeist about alcohol. Alcohol is the only drug that you are shamed for not using, yet it's the only drug that literally can kill you when you're detoxing from it if you don't detox properly. It does, there are scientific research studies to show that it creates inflammation, that it is linked to certain cancers. So here's the thing. I'm not judging people. If people enjoy and can socially drink, fine, do that. I'm not judging you. But my point is just that there is so much crappy rhetoric around sober bar. Lindsay's response to that, it did trigger me. It did annoy me because she says to Carl, he reports that she feels like he's pigeonholing himself in the sober mental health space. And I just had a real strong reaction to that. I was like, what? Okay. I think that I'm just going to be really honest. I think that Lindsay has a lot of wounds because she didn't get the love that she needed from her mother. And, our parents are supposed to be our first source of unconditional love. And unfortunately, for those of us who don't get that, it impacts everything about us. How do we think about ourselves? How do we feel about ourselves? What is our self-esteem like? Who are we attracted to? Who is attracted to us, right? And it's all unconscious until you start understanding your trauma and your wounds and you start looking at it and you can only do better when you know better, right? And sometimes that's a really slow process. So, again, just a reminder to be gentle. And I am not trying to character assassin Lindsay. I think she's a human being who has been very wounded And she is in complete denial, or it's completely unconscious about how her trauma plays out in relationships. So as I mentioned, I don't watch Summer House, but I did go back and I watched, there's a lot of clips online about, Lindsay's greatest hits, Lindsay's and Carl's greatest hits, Amanda and Kyle's greatest hits. And that's what they're called. I'm not trying to be facetious, but just like to give me an idea of these people. And what I can tell you is that before Lindsay and Carl were together, these issues played out the same way with every single person. The sad fact of the matter is that when we don't get the unconditional love we need from a parent, we end up looking to meet that need in other places. But unfortunately, our spouse or partner or significant other, that's a different kind of love. That is not unconditional love. In fact, it's very conditional, right? You're not going to stay with a partner who mistreats you or, listen, we all have, so no shame in that. But I'm saying, like, once you know what the stuff is, it's hard to ignore, like for Carl, it's hard to ignore. Like he's clear-minded now. He understands, he's learning about his stuff. And so when you start to learn and grow, you can't help but use that lens to look at your partner, right? And if your partner isn't learning and growing and they're still stuck in the trauma, it's really hard to move forward together as a couple. And I think, in my opinion, that's what we're seeing with Lindsay and Carl. They are like oil and water. They have a very toxic relationship. In my opinion, it feels very unhealthy. And again, in my opinion, it is because Lindsay is looking for unconditional love in people who aren't going to give that to her. And here's the good news for people who are listening to this, who are like, okay, I didn't get that. What can I do? Seriously, the answer, love yourself. Not kidding. When I started learning to be my own number one, give myself unconditional love, unconditional care, unconditional support, right? I'm my own number one fan. I'm number one. I want one of those foam fingers that says Bish on it. Ooh, merch idea. Maybe we should make foam fingers that say Bish on it. Anyway, I feel that she needs to be honest about the role she plays in her own suffering. And she is not ready to do that yet, which I get it because it's hard. But she is really, in my opinion, as I'm watching this, I know we have a whole season to go, right? We have a whole season, we have the reunion, we have all that. But right now, what I'm seeing is enough to say Carl made the right decision. Right? Whether Lindsay, it's hard to make the right decisions, right? If you're in love and you're with someone, right? I've been in situations before in relationships that sometimes love just isn't enough. And that is the sad fact of the matter, is that love is not always enough. And you have to be in a true partnership where you're both having a willingness to grow and change and shift, because otherwise it's not going to work. And Lindsay just doesn't want to do that work. Lindsay has an authoritarian dictator style relationship style, which is you're either with me or against me. I'm right, you're wrong. And I'm sorry, no relationship is going to survive that way. And here's the thing. It's not just Carl, right? In the Summer House episode that just aired, you hear all the rest of the folks talking about, we've all experienced this with Lindsay. We've all experienced it, right? So it's like people wanted Carl dead, but it's like, men deserve safety too, and they deserve to have feelings, and they deserve to have, all these things. And so I just think that, it's hard because I'm sure Lindsay was and is heartbroken. It is never easy to walk away from a relationship that just isn't serving you. It's hard because the love that's there, where does that go? It's tough. But quite frankly, love just isn't enough. And this is a good example where Carl and Lindsay, they have this love, but it's just not enough. The relationship just isn't working. Carl said multiple times, I don't think she's listening to what's important to me. It's not about the bar, which, by the way, I still think is an amazing idea. We need sober spaces in the world. Sobriety is amazing. It's great. And I have a huge sober community that follows me. And so I think that this is actually a good idea, but I think that because Lindsay is so stuck in her stuff, she really has a hard time seeing outside that box. But the point is, it's not about the bar. It's not about the bar. It's about the immediate shutting down and lack of support. She didn't even hear him out. It was like, no, sorry, I have to veto that. And it just like, she puts herself in a parent role with Carl, I feel, where it's like, as a partner, that's not your job to say that. Like, unless she was paying for it 100%, and listen, maybe she would be. I have no idea. But the only time she would really get to say that is if he was like, hey, I want to do this and I'd like you to fund it. Even then, I would hope that your partner, it would be more of a conversation, because shutting it down so quickly just says, I literally don't give two shits what you're saying. This is a no, and I don't want to talk about this again. And it makes Carl feel so small. It makes him feel tiny, right? So I didn't like that. And then, when they were at dinner and Carl, he had this bark that he was doing, which it was like so funny. She's like, Carl, if you do that one more time, I might give the ring back. And everyone at the table was like, what? That was so weird to say. I just feel like I'm watching her take all of these opportunities to just chop Carl down and make him feel small and make him feel bad. And if I'm being honest, she doesn't even really seem to like him. It really truly seems like she's just not that into him, but I don't know. So if I'm feeling that as an audience member, I can only imagine how Carl was feeling. And it's like, would you want your child to marry someone to go through with a wedding just to like save face? Like, that's wild. I feel that if we're in a relationship or a situation that does not serve us, the best thing that we can do is to say, before you get to walking down the aisle, right? Like Luann and Countess Luann and Tom, right? It was like she took this like fierce sense of stubborn pride in getting down the aisle. And then, of course, look at what happened with that. It was like it was such a short marriage, because it's not about just getting to the wedding. It's about, who is the person that I'm marrying? Is this person, can I have long-term success and support with them? And, Carl obviously knew, like, no, this is not going to work for me. So one thing I really want to address is they have these conflict cycles, right? So, and Lindsay talks about this. It's, in her estimation, the conflict style starts with Carl picking at her. Okay. It's always, and she uses the same language. So he picks at her. Then he gets quote unquote aggressive. And this is what I want to say. In my honest estimation of watching Lindsay and Carl, Lindsay's the one who's aggressive, not Carl. Carl isn't yelling. And so the thing is that when you've gone through a lot of trauma, you tend to misperceive or to perceive someone talking to you as aggressive when it really isn't. And in my opinion of what I'm watching, Carl is not being aggressive at all. But the point is, she feels he's being aggressive, right? One thing I talked about on Besties by Caitlin is that feelings are irrational and they're not facts, right? So sometimes, I used to say this in my practice a lot, feelings are not facts. So it doesn't mean your feeling is invalid, but it also doesn't make it a fact. And so what Lindsay, she's conflating those two topics of like, I feel this way, therefore I have every right to feel it and he's wrong. And it's like, well, who wants to tell her? Like, that's not true. You have the right to feel how you feel, but that doesn't also make Carl wrong. And so then what she does is she starts to project her stuff on Carl. And then she says, like, his demons come out on me, but really she's the one who is projecting all of her stuff on Carl. Like, it's a lot of projection, lots and lots of projection. When they were sitting on the dock and they were like arguing, it was a very eye-opening situation for me, because so we found out in this episode that Carl smokes weed, right? Which is like the whole California sober thing, which it frustrates me, and I have a lot of thoughts about it. But everybody's sobriety journey is their own. But I just, again, want to be clear that using a mood-altering substance in sobriety has to be looked at, because that's not full sobriety, right? Like in the program, we talk about like there's marijuana management. We kind of joke that people who get sober, they kind of go that route. And so here's the thing. I'm not going to sit here and be judgmental. Whatever way people need to save their own life, who am I to say? But I am also just saying that I think what frustrates Lindsay about Carl is that he's preaching sobriety when he is still using a mood-altering substance. I mean, weed is. It's THC. It does have some health benefits. It does have some, there are some good things about it, but it is still a mood-altering substance, right? And so what I perceived to be happening when Lindsay and Carl were having this conversation, I swear to you, it felt like third wall breaking, because Lindsay, I feel like she was almost looking at the camera and being like, I find it to be hypocritical. You're smoking weed and you're always calling me out for my drinking. And it's like, I feel like she wanted the camera. She was like talking to the audience and being like, see, he's not perfect either. See, you know what I mean? Like that's the vibe that she gave me. And here's the thing. She's not wrong, right? Carl's preaching sobriety, and Carl says about her drinking, I don't care that Lindsay drinks. I care how her behavior changes when she drinks, but I don't think that that's true. I do think that he cares that she drinks, because every time they have an argument, he brings up how she's drinking. And it's like, listen, Carl has the right to feel however he feels about her getting completely drunk and acting irrationally, because she does. And by the way, people, when they get so drunk, like that's usually not the kind of person that you want to be around, and why I haven't watched Summer House, because that's not fun for me. That's not entertainment. That's just gross. But I think Carl does care that Lindsay drinks, and I think he does care how she acts when she drinks, and he cares about all of it. And, when you're sober and you're trying to stay away from alcohol, I think it does trigger him, but I think he's just like less loud and less irrational about how he talks about that. So he gets triggered and then calls out her drinking, and then she gets triggered, and then she, and it's just like a complete disaster. They have these conflict patterns that she feels he's being hypocritical, and she wants people to be on her side, right? Lindsay seems like the person to me who just desperately wants validation, and everyone deserves validation and love and support. But when you're acting like an asshole, it's hard to get that, right? And so I think Lindsay just doesn't do herself any favors. Now, here's the thing that I want to say. So on Watch What Happens Live, Carl was on with, oh God, I'm forgetting her name. I think Trishelle from Traders. I didn't watch Traders. I have too much stuff to watch. So sometimes I'm just like, I can't do it. But so he was on with her, and he talked about, there was a quote that he gave that I want to speak to a little bit, is that Andy calls Carl out on his THC use, right? Because Carl was talking about being sober. Okay, so before I get into that, let me share with you what Carl said. He said it has nothing to do with my sobriety, in response to Lindsay constantly accusing him of being on something. He said it has nothing to do with my sobriety. She was trying to hurt me, and there were foundational things that we were not on the same page with. And I'm like, yeah, as a just an observer, I agree with that. I think that Lindsay sometimes, maybe this isn't her intention, but she does things to try to evoke a reaction from Carl. And here's what I want to say about this is that when in a relationship with two people, and when one of them gets sober, it creates a shift. And sometimes the other person, I've seen this firsthand, they have a hard time accepting the healthier shift. And it's almost like the partner benefits from their partner being sick and unwell. And I just can't help but think that sick Carl may have fed something in Lindsay a little bit. maybe gave her a purpose. She felt like she could save him. I'm not sure. And now I feel that the change he's made has changed their dynamic so much that it's just unsustainable. So he talked about, Andy asked about Lindsay saying that she was blindsided. And, Carl said, you're seeing it firsthand. We had serious things to be addressed and she didn't believe it. And he said, I think it was the best decision for both of us. And if I'm being honest, I completely agree. You can't go into a wedding when you cannot even communicate with someone or repair a relationship, whatever you want to call it, or really, the issues that are in their relationships. If you're unable to repair that, well, then you shouldn't be walking down the aisle in 6 months, because through that way lies madness, divorce, unhappy relationships. You don't have to get married. And so I just think that we need to give Carl some credit in terms of, I don't think that would have been good for Lindsay either, but maybe she wasn't in a good enough place to be able to say, I need to walk away from this. And sometimes someone in the relationship has to pull the eject or push the eject button, whatever. So he said the glaring reason for the breakup was foundational things that were not stable to move forward with a lifetime commitment. I agree. He's seeking out a career path that Lindsay disagreed with. Okay. He says he feels like he's free from things that she held me back with. And when said, if you had to give a percentage of responsibility, he said 50-50. And I thought, you know what? I think that is a wonderful answer, because as I have said in all of my podcasts, when a relationship, is falling apart, or when there's relationship issues, both parties always play a role. Always, always, always. It's never 100% on one side or the other, but it is shared responsibility. And so I think for Carl to say 50-50, I just think, that sat with me, and I thought, well, he's really doing the work, because he knows that he plays a role in that too. He said that he's taking time to focus on career and family, which again is, I think he's trying to get back to himself. Now, this is the quote regarding the marijuana use, because Andy did call that out. And so here's what he said. I have a sponsor who I'm very open with about my THC use. The drugs that were killing me were alcohol, cocaine, Ambien, Xanax, Adderall, ecstasy, Molly. And I've removed all those things from my life, and I'm very proud of that. Okay. So here's what I want to say. Kudos to Carl, right? That's a lot of substances to get out of your life. He has a sponsor, and he's honest with his sponsor about the THC use. Now, that being said, when you look at someone who has a list like that of substances that they abused, that tells me that it's not about the substance, it's about the function of the substance. And if you're looking at THC, the function of THC can still be used inappropriately if we're looking at functionality, right? And so, again, I'm not trying to judge anybody's sobriety journey. Whatever you need to do to save your own life, kudos. It's the hardest work I've ever, I've been honored to help people, be a guide through doing that work. I've seen people change. I've truly seen it, and it's amazing. But I think that Carl really needs to continue to look at that. And for me, as long as he is honest with his sponsor about it, well, then that's all I could ask. If he weren't being honest about it, I'd be really concerned. I would say, that would be a relapse behavior that I would be concerned about. But, that's between he and his sponsor and his home group, or, his sober community. I hope that they do hold him accountable for that. And, his journey is going to be his own. So the last thing that I'm going to say about Lindsay is that, we see the shift with Lindsay where, she gets triggered. So when Lindsay said she's activated, what she actually means is she's being triggered, which is fair enough, right? We all get triggered. We all get activated. It's kind of a word that's been co-opted, and so people hate it, but being triggered is very real. And I think that if Lindsay started being her own safe space, she would realize that when she does get triggered, there are ways to move through that are easier and better for her. She deserves better, I believe. And, I wish her the best. I look forward to seeing, well, I don't look forward to seeing it. Actually, I'm dreading seeing how this plays out because, you never want to see people have hurt feelings and be upset. Like I don't personally, I have a hard time with that, but, I will continue to cover this and I will continue to talk about it because I think it's an important topic. And, on the same note, I do want to say, Mia from Real Housewives of Potomac, she was talking about being sober because she wasn't drinking hard alcohol. She was just drinking wine. Well, that's not sobriety. I'm going to be really honest. Sobriety isn't about putting a substance down. It's about the work that you do of self-assessment and growth and, trying to become a better person. That's sobriety. Just putting down a substance, that's being dry. Okay. So just want to be clear about that. And listen, a lot of people who get into sobriety the right way have to do it the wrong way a bunch of times, or not. I shouldn't say the wrong way, just ways that don't work for them. Everyone's journey is different. Okay. So now moving on to Real Housewives of Beverly Hills Part 3. Ooh, this is a marathon today. I'm honestly not going to spend a lot of time on this because here's what I wanted to say about it. I didn't want to watch it until I saw everybody's reactions. I wanted to see the reactions from people on social media, and then I wanted to watch it. And I have to honestly disagree. People were really pissed off about Kyle not giving any answers. People felt it was a snooze fest. I'm going to wholly disagree with that. And listen, maybe this is just because this is what I do. I'm really good at getting, like a tiny amount of meat off a bone, which I know is like a gross analogy. And I'm pretty much plant-based, vegan, vegetarian my whole life. I'm not much of a meat eater, but if you can think of a better analogy, please share it with me. So I will acknowledge that I think that Kyle did give us answers. People just didn't like the answers that we got. And so here's what I'm going to say. You cannot force somebody to come out. We can't. Okay. I feel like the rhetoric around people wanting Kyle to define her relationship with Morgan, quite frankly, that's a you problem, right? People who are concerned about that, somebody's sexual orientation or exploration is none of our business. Now, what I will say is Kyle also needs to be aware of the role she plays in her own suffering, right? Her and Morgan, they did fan flames, doing the music video. Kyle said she didn't know about the creative of that. I don't believe that for a second. I just think that maybe they weren't ready for the backlash that they would get about it. But right, I do think that she has to be aware, her and Morgan have to be aware, and how, the fire may have been lit, but they kind of did pour some gasoline on it. However, I have always said that sexual orientation or sexuality is more fluid than most folks would like to understand or admit. Okay. It's not just gay or straight, right? There's a spectrum here. Okay. And so what I've always said about Kyle is that when it came to the situation with Mauricio or the situation with Morgan, I don't know how we can expect her to define something that she does not yet still understand. Okay. It's just like being a person. It's like, if someone asks you how you feel, like if someone asks Lindsay how she feels about a situation, sometimes she doesn't know. So when you answer that question, it's going to be unsatisfying for people, right? But like what I watched from the reunion was Kyle clearly not knowing how to define her relationship with Morgan. She wasn't saying, well, no, per se. She didn't just flat out, well, she did say, no, they didn't have like a relationship like that. But she also she admitted things like, I was curious. And, she said here, I'm evolving. Okay. That's what she said. I'm evolving and I was curious. And my God, that's fair. I don't like the societal rhetoric around you need to define your sexual orientation and you need to come out with it. That's not fair. I just don't like that. and I know people are going to be like, well, she is on the show. And so I vacillate back and forth between, like, if you want privacy and you're not sure what's going on, take some time for yourself. If you're going to be on the show, you do have to be authentic, right? And honest and all of these things. So I do kind of vacillate between those two things. But I will just repeat again, Kyle, I believe, is experiencing a delayed adolescence. She spent her entire life trying to be the good daughter, the good sister, the good mother, the good friend, the good wife, the good all of these things. And when Lorraine died, she was just like, what's the point? Because terrible stuff happens. I think it rocked her to her core. And now she's evolving in a way that I don't know that she ever saw coming. So let's let her have that. Evolve, figure out who you are, right? There's, in terms of sexuality, there's, it's not just gay, straight, or bisexual. There's demisexuality, which is like you're attracted to it doesn't matter what the label is. It's like what's inside, right? There's all of these different kind of options now. Not options, that sounds so insane, but like it's not as black and white as we once were made to believe that it is. I mean, I never believed that, but like, there have been people on the LGBTQIA plus spectrum for millenniums, like forever and ever since the beginning of time. It's just how it's being talked about and framed now, right? I think what's interesting with Kyle, the most fascinating stuff that I get from her is that Kyle and Kathy, they have these tics where when they're talking about something tough or emotionally charged, Kyle does the Kermit voice, she kind of does this little Kermit voice. I'm doing it terrible, but you know what I mean. She kind of does this with her lips, kind of smacks them. She does the shoulder roll, and Kathy does the same thing. She has this kind of lip tic as well. And, she uses lip gloss and stuff like that. So that's interesting that as sisters, that has been their response. It makes me feel like it was from something from growing up, right? Like they were taught, don't speak against the family, right? Don't share our secrets. And you know what I say about that. Secrets keep us sick. But they were literally brought up to taught that secrets just stay in the family. And so I think that they have these nonverbal behaviors that kind of give away when they're having like an emotional experience. So I think that, Kyle said something happened where I did lose my trust. Okay. And people want to know what that is. And again, I'm going to go out on a limb and say it is none of our damn business. When Kyle is ready to share exactly what happened, she'll share it. But she has said consistently something happened that she lost her trust. She said, I really tried. I thought it would come back and it hasn't. And so people are so concrete in terms of their thinking. They want to know, well, what? But she's telling us what? She's telling us that she's evolving. She's curious about things. Her relationship with Mo is decompensating, and something happened where she lost her trust. Okay. Now, whether it was, I go out on a limb and say, I think it was an emotional affair. I think it was, she talked about there were rumors that, for years that he had been cheating all the way back until like season, the season where LVP was on, and Brandy, there was that whole scandal with Brandy bringing the tabloids about how Mauricio was cheating and things like that. And Kyle admitted, like, yeah, that made me insecure. That made me concerned about things. But she is very clear that something happened where she lost her trust. I happen to think maybe it was something emotional affair based. I don't know. Really, it's none of our business, if I'm being honest. She's saying things without saying them. And so I think that I felt it was a lot more telling than maybe regular folks felt. And here's the thing, before I end here, because this is too long of a podcast, but one thing I wanted to address was Sutton's medical issue. And so I have a lot of empathy, right? I have a lot of medical issues. I have a lot of empathy for Sutton, because having medical issues that people constantly shit on you about is just like not acceptable. And so when Sutton had her kind of event and Kathy made a comment, it's a hot flash. You should know that. Like, she just completely dismissed her. And in that moment, I just felt this is what Kyle has a problem with Kathy. And this is what people have problems with Kathy, right? She can be so dismissive. And so like when she was clearly mad at Sutton, right? Because she said, Kathy said, I was about to go after her next. It was a good way to get out of being here. I just felt that was so rude and so insensitive. And I think that when Kathy really feels strongly about something, she really has a very venomous tongue. She has a very sharp tongue. She says very mean things. And so when Kyle was saying the meanness of it, like, I'm happy to see all the sisters back together. And I swear to you, if I do not see Kim, Kyle, and Kathy next season on Beverly Hills, I'm going to explode, because I want to see all of them together. I desperately want to see it. They're all back together. They're all seem to be in a better place, and I'm super happy for them. But I think this is a microcosm of an example of what Kyle's talking about, how Kathy can just be really mean, really judgmental, and really condescending. And here's what I'm going to say about Sutton. You can't fake like a high blood pressure and a high pulse rate and low blood sugar and all these things. You can't fake that. That's not fakeable, because they had paramedics on the set who were like taking her, her vitals and things like that. So Sutton was experiencing something very real. I'm definitely not going to speculate about what that is, because that's not what I do. And as someone with chronic illness, when someone says I'm having an experience, you say, you tell me about that. I'm not going to judge that. Okay. So I didn't like how Kathy handled that. And I hope Sutton's okay. I mean, I've seen on social media that she kind of addressed it and things like that. But, oh, and I'm sorry, the one other thing Kathy said, which leads me to believe that Kyle is sharing more. We just have to read between the lines. Kathy said to Kyle, don't be embarrassed. And so here's what I do notice, because I do follow Morgan Wade. I really like her music. I think she's super talented. And I always see Kathy liking her stuff and commenting on her stuff. Kathy really does seem like she enjoys Morgan. And I feel like Kathy also is like, she's not really subtle. And I think that Kathy is in a way trying to say to Kyle, like, you don't have to be embarrassed about this. We accept you for who you are. And even Sutton said, like before she, went to the hospital, even Sutton was like, it's okay to be who you are. So I think these women are just trying to give finally Kyle the space to be who she is. And from my experience, if you want to get something out of someone, the best way to do that is not barking at them and saying, well, tell me, and what is it? And you're not being honest. It's to give them space and to walk away and to say, I'm here when you need me. And that is how to get people to open up. So that is going to be it for me today for this extra super long bonus episode. I hope you have all enjoyed it. Here's one last thing I will say. Please go over to my podcast, give it a 5-star review. I would greatly appreciate that. If you're not following me on Instagram, please go to my Instagram page at YBT Therapist and follow me there. And lastly, the last thing that I want to say is I just started a supporters club for people who want to support me. It's $5 a month. And I wanted to speak to this for a minute because I am fully aware and understand that, like, we all have financial obligations and things like that. So please know, from my mouth to your ears, there are no expectations on my end. I appreciate the people who have already signed up for this. I appreciate you very much. And it's a small group, believe me, but bless you all. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. If you do sign up to support me, I will be doing one extra episode a month for those supporters. So the way to do that is in Instagram. I have a link tree where you can click on that and support. Or the other way to do that is you can go to Spreaker.com, look up YBT Therapist Podcast, and then there's a button that says support, and then you can support me that way. Like I said, I will be releasing one episode a month at this point. If I get more people, I'll definitely do more. But honestly, no expectations. This was just something that I put out there because, quite frankly, people think I make a lot of money doing this, and I don't. Unless you're Joe Rogan, you're not making like a ton of money. Like, I don't have sponsors. I'm really not making money from the podcast, but like, that's also not your problem, right? My finances are my responsibility. So my point is there's no guilt. There's no expectation. Thank you to those of you who signed up. And I just wanted to put it out there in case more of you wanted an extra episode of Your Bitch Therapist. So thank you all so much. Please take care of yourselves and each other. Disclaimer: posts are not intended to diagnose, treat, or provide medical advice. Your Bitch Therapist is for entertainment and informational purposes only. The podcast, my opinions, and posts are my own and not associated with past or present employers, any organizations, Bravo TV, Greyheart Productions, or any other television network. The information in YBT podcast and on its social media is provided for general informational purposes only and is not intended to diagnose or treat. Please do not act or refrain from acting based on anything you read, see, or hear on YBT podcast or associated social media. Communicating with YBT via email and or social media does not form a therapeutic alliance. Melissa, operator of YBT, is unable to provide any therapeutic advice, treatment, or feedback.